Hello and welcome back to a new video on my channel. Recently there are a lot of questions about using DSLR cameras for astrophotography. People are asking me about features that are important for astrophotography. They ask me about what's important when planning to buy a DSLR camera for astrophotography. Therefore, in this video, I would like to focus on using DSLR cameras for astrophotography. So I would like to talk about things your camera needs in order to use it for deep sky astrophotography. So now let's get started. The very first aspect that is very important when using DSLR cameras for astrophotography is that your camera is having a manual mode. Manual mode means that you can control the exposure time, the aperture, and the ISO value yourself. In astrophotography, you would like to capture images of night sky. So usually we use a very long exposure time. And it's very important that we can control these camera settings. For sure, we would like to keep noise low in our astrophotography images. Therefore, we need to control the ISO value again. So it's very important that you can control these different settings for astrophotography. So if your camera does not have manual mode, it's very challenging to use that one for deep sky astrophotography. So having a manual mode is one of the most important aspects your camera should have if you're planning to use that one for deep sky astrophotography. The next aspect is live view mode. It's very important, or at least helpful, that your camera is having a live view mode. In astrophotography, we like to focus on the stars, and achieving perfect focus is very important in order to achieve great images of deep sky objects. Therefore, focusing is very, very important, and live view actually means that you look on the display and you see what your camera is seeing or capturing right now. That's very, very helpful because I'm personally focusing on the stars in deep sky astrophotography. So I'm using an atomic telescope. Therefore, I have these spikes on the stars when zooming in, and having this live view mode is very necessary in order to achieve perfect sharpness. And especially in landscape astrophotography, it's important as well because you can focus on a distant object in night sky, for example, or in distant tree. And in this case, live view mode is very helpful and for me necessary for deep sky astrophotography. The next aspect I would like to talk about is raw image. It's very important that your camera can capture images in RAW. That's important for post-processing because, so I'm personally using Deep Sky Stacker in order to stack these images. So in astrophotography, we combine multiple images to reduce noise in our final results. Therefore, we're using a technique called stacking, and I'm personally using Deep Sky Stacker for stacking these images, and you can only stack images when they were captured in RAW. And that's one aspect why RAW is very important, and on the other side, RAW is important for post-processing because it helps us to process our images easier and to bring out even more details. Therefore, it's very, very important that your DSLR camera can capture images in RAW. So that's very, very important if you're planning to use your camera for astrophotography. So definitely check whether your camera can do that or not. The next aspect that is important for your DSLR camera, if you're planning to use that one for deep sky astrophotography, is that your DSLR camera should have a connection for a remote shutter release cable. So in astrophotography, we usually plan to capture images all night long, and using a shutter release cable helps us to capture multiple images all over the night. So when using that shutter release cable, you can set the exposure time, the time between the different images. So the remote shutter release cable helps you to capture images all night long. Therefore, it's very important that you can connect a remote shutter release cable to your camera, because if not, you need to click manual on the camera in order to capture images all night long. And that's definitely not possible in astrophotography. On the one hand, that's not possible because you need to click on the camera to take an image all night long, which is one problem. And on the other side, when clicking on the camera, your telescope will move, and therefore your images will not be that sharp. So connection for a remote shutter release cable is very, very important if you're planning to use a DSLR camera for astrophotography. The next aspect I would like to talk about is the ISO performance. As I mentioned, in astrophotography we try to keep the noise low because that's very important in astrophotography. Therefore we use a technique called stacking, and furthermore we use calibration frames to reduce noise in our final results. But still it's very important that your camera has less noise because then it's easier for you to remove noise in your final results, and furthermore, in the end, you will have less noise in your final results. Therefore, the ISO performance is very important in astrophotography. I'm personally using a Canon EOS 2000D, a Canon EOS 600D, and a Canon EOS 450D for astrophotography. And if you're looking for one of these cameras, feel free to ask me questions down below in the comments. So as I mentioned, ISO performance is very, very important in astrophotography. The next aspect I would like to talk about is a flip screen. A flip screen is not necessary for astrophotography, but still it's very, very important. I started with a Canon EOS 2000D for astrophotography, and after that I upgraded to a Canon EOS 600D. I'm still using both cameras. The Canon EOS 2000D unfortunately does not have a flip screen, but the Canon EOS 600D does have a flip screen. And in my case, it was so helpful using this flip screen on the Canon EOS 600D for the very first time. So especially when focusing on stars and night sky, this flip screen is so helpful. So as I have already mentioned, the flip screen is not necessary for astrophotography, but still it's very helpful to have a flip screen on your camera. The next aspect I would like to talk about is the bulb mode. The bulb mode is very important on your camera because when using a camera for astrophotography, you can select a maximum exposure time of 30 seconds. But usually we would like to capture longer exposure times of the night sky. So something like 1 minute or even 5 minutes. In this case, the bulb mode is very important because it allows you to use longer exposure times. So that's something that's very helpful in astrophotography. Still, you can capture images of night sky without the bulb mode, but then the exposure time needs to be shorter, which is not that good. Sometimes we'd like to capture images that are longer, as I mentioned, so up to 5 minutes. If you're planning to capture images of the night sky without a tracking mount, you can use a camera without bulb mode because then the exposure time needs to be very short, and therefore it's not that important. But if you're planning to use a camera for astrophotography, so for capturing images of galaxies, nebulae with a tracking mount, usually we like to capture longer exposure times, and therefore the bulb mode is very important and helpful in this case. These are all aspects that are very important if you're planning to use your DSLR camera for astrophotography. If you have any more important camera features, feel free to write these ones down below in the comments because that will definitely be helpful to other astrophotographers. So if you're planning to buy a DSLR camera for astrophotography, definitely make sure to check whether your camera has these different camera features because they are very helpful for astrophotography. And if you have any questions about using DSLR cameras in general for astrophotography, feel free to ask me down below in the comments too. If this guide and this video was helpful to you, I would really appreciate a like and a subscription. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, clear skies, Felix.